Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. You hear it every 4 years. Both sides claiming this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But in 2024, they're saying it with a little bit more intensity and depth of feeling. New Hampshire is a battleground state, so that means we get to see top leaders from around the country coming here to help their respective parties. One of those VIP visitors is here this weekend. It's Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. He's our guest this morning on Close Up. Governor, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you're talking about Democrats need to be bold. Tell us what that means in practice, and in particular, does it mean being more unapologetically progressive?
Well, I think it becomes being more unapologetic about making sure you're delivering for the middle class. And I think I'm up here specifically to talk about governor's races, because we've seen when you've got governors who are willing to put things like, free breakfast and lunch for kids on, in schools, we see the impact of that. It has long-range impact on their achievement, long-range impact on the economy. And I think being bold to say where we believe that, look, I don't believe government should be involved in your bedroom, your exam room, or your kids' locker rooms. And I think being very clear about those things and the contrast, I think we've somehow been a little too timid on them. We're especially seeing that on things like IVF. Those of us who've been through fertility issues know how important that is. So I think it's just being bold about articulating what people want to hear. What are you going to do if you're governor?
What are things that Democrats do that don't work? The kinds of things that lose races these days?
Well, I think one of the things is that we have to believe we can win everywhere, and I think we've made it clear on this. New Hampshire, we believe, is a top pickup opportunity. We believe that with North Carolina, but look, we got great candidates out in Indiana. We've got them out in Montana, and I think taking the case to folks that, look, if you want to see competency, if you want to see solutions to things like roads and bridges and water treatment plants, go with these Democrats. Don't go with the chaos of trying to build fear into that. And I think one of the things that we have been a little bit timid about is believing somehow that we can't win in rural areas. I'm from a town of 400. I had 24 kids in my graduating class. Those are my families. Democratic policies work out there. Good schools, good roads. And I think we have been a little bit too willing to cede some of these areas, and I'm trying to make the case that there's no reason we can't win across the country.
Yeah, in Minnesota, you're the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, and yet, over the last few years, farm country has been increasingly red, increasingly Republican. How do you get back to that? And that's certainly, traditionally, the Democratic Party base is rural. How do you reclaim that?
I agree, and those are my people. I think it's going back to the basics. They get caught up in some of these social issues that are driving people, being very clear about this. Look, it's not government's decision about your family. You need to make those decisions, your health care decisions, and then talk about where we're helping the economy. We're investing in things like child care that make a difference. Our businesses tell us the biggest problem we have is we need to find workers, we need to find them housing, and there needs to be child care so they can work. We're seeing an economy that's growing that gets stagnated by that. So I think leaning into those things, we're pro-business party. Why would we not talk about that more? And I think you're starting to see that happen. And I recognize there's been a shift. I represented a very red district and grew up on a farm. We shouldn't shy away from that we're the party, I think, that can deliver for those areas.
And circling back, you mentioned the governor's races. Where does New Hampshire rank on your list of priorities? Obviously, you didn't get a shot at defeating Chris Sununu, but it's the next best thing for the Democrats. He's retiring. Open seat. Where is that on your list?
Yeah, it's near the top, if not the top. Look, we're going to fight across the country, and these races are organic. The people of New Hampshire will decide who their candidate is. But we think this is an incredible pickup opportunity. When you elect a Democratic governor, you end up protecting those basic freedoms, and we've seen it that you end up seeing the economy grow more. You see those basic investments in education and supporting of public education. You see a real, I think young people see this, a real commitment to things like climate change. And so New Hampshire is our top pickup opportunity. We're going to be here, we're going to invest, and we're quite honestly going to make sure that the contrast between the Republican nominee and our Democratic nominee is clear to people here.
It's a presidential election this year as well, too. That's going to drive a lot of the turnout. You'll be in office at least through the next midterms, if I'm correct there.
Yeah.
If you have a President Trump, a second Trump administration, non-consecutive, and he makes good on his promise to start the largest deportation operation in U.S. history, as the governor of Minnesota, is the state apparatus helping with that operation or resisting?
Well, this issue, and I have to say that this really irritates me, having served in Congress and having been out in farm country, where, look, immigration is the heart and soul of who we've been as a country. But everybody, we need to control the border in a way that people come in legally. The federal government, especially the House, not passing legislation is horrific. What we're going to do is make sure that we treat people with the humanity they need to be treated with. We would ask folks to follow the rules, and I would come back to this again. If we could pass a piece of legislation that President Biden put out, this would solve most of it. But I got to be candid with you. I don't get the feeling that Republicans want to solve the problem. I think they want to admire the problem. And I think in the state of Minnesota, we simply approach this with following the law, but we do it with humanity, and it is a federal issue. that I'm doing all I can, and having served in Congress, they need to pass this legislation. It's good.
Yeah, you served several terms in Congress. What do you make of how this dynamic that's evolved now, where Trump says it and suddenly it's the Republican caucus position?
Oh, it's horrific, because I was the ranking member of the VA committee, and I served on VA Ag and Transportation. My chairman was a Republican, Phil Rowe from Tennessee. He and I were polar opposites politically. We were fully aligned on caring for our veterans and watching this. A person like Phil Rowe would have never capitulated to this if he didn't think it was morally correct. As far as like national security issues, the FISA bill, things like that, it's stunning to me in a few short years. I left Congress in 2018 that we would disintegrate it to that point. These folks need to stand up. They can be just as conservative as they always are, but it's not the job of a former president to be dictating things in Congress and slowing things down. So it's a real challenge for me. It's a bit heartbreaking. It's one of the reasons why I believe governors are the firewall against a lot of this, and governors just have to get it done. You can't be harshly partisan when you've got to work together across the aisle to get roads and bridges done. So we're seeing that. I think people are starting to recognize that's why these governor's races are critical.
And Trump is a disruptor across several fronts. You know, polling and data show he's making inroads with minority constituencies, many of whom have formed the backbone of the Democratic Party as well. You know, you talked about winning back rural voters. Why do you think Democrats are losing some of these, constituencies that have been theirs, and Trump is peeling off not big numbers, but small enough to not be unnoticeable?
Yeah, much smaller than we're peeling off in the suburbs, women, young people, and all that. Look, I think one of the things is that Donald Trump has figured out that chaos sticks to everyone, and there's a frustration. So look, Joe Biden, first day in office, proposed things to help on the border. Nothing's been done in Congress, and I think if you're an average person out there listening, it's a pox on both houses, and that's the way you try and view it. So I think there's a bit of frustration that goes with that. I think folks are saying, they're dealing with global economic pressures, even though the United States is better off than others. It's real. Egg prices are up, and they start to recognize that. So I think it's the frustration. What I do believe, though, is when it becomes a choice between competency and the largest bipartisan infrastructure bill versus the chaos, revenge, and things of that Donald Trump is proposing, I think when people come back home. So I think what you're seeing is some of those numbers, and it's polling. I'm not convinced that they're going to not be there when they need to be.
Yeah, and how do Democrats run? I mean, obviously there are some macroeconomic numbers that look good. There's pain for a lot of people at the local level when they're just looking at their family budget. It's got to be tricky for Democrats to thread that needle and say, hey, keep going with us, even though some of these things aren't going so well.
Well, this is again with governors. That's why in Minnesota we have free breakfast and lunch for all students. That's a middle-class tax cut. We did $1 billion in tax cuts aimed at the middle class. We are able to invest in things like child care. We have paid family and medical leave. So people in Minnesota, for example, might be seeing those higher prices, but they've seen higher wages, they've seen some of the supports from government, and they've seen businesses start to grow. When you see the Mayo Clinic invest $5.5 billion in growth in biotech or whatever, start to make the case this is what you're going to get. Because you're right about the macro piece of trying to tell them, look, inflation is higher everywhere else in the world. Economic numbers are worse everywhere else in the world. Well, that doesn't change the fact when you go to buy groceries, the price is up. So I think we need to keep talking to them about it, keep telling. And then I think here comes the contrast again. All of those numbers were way worse under Donald Trump. We had much higher unemployment. We saw inflation going higher. I just think the case is that when people come down to it, they're frustrated, things are difficult, our politics is hard. They're going to choose competency and over chaos. And I think this is where I'm going to make the case. A Democratic governor in New Hampshire will help be a part of that.
And when it comes to competency and implementing policy, question for you. New Hampshire has yet to legalize cannabis, but it may or may not do that this session. What's your advice, having gone through this, to other states on how to make this work?
Yeah, and it'll be the choice they make. We did in Minnesota because, look, and I have two young kids, 17 and 23. I certainly wouldn't encourage them to use them, no more than alcohol or anything like that. But I trust adults to make their own decisions. Prohibition has not worked. We've criminalized folks for this, at the same time forcing a black market to it. So I would say, think about how you're going to do this. Think about how you're going to implement it. We're learning from other states who did it in the forefront of it. And I think there's an opportunity here to put safeguards around this. We certainly don't want our children to get it no more than we want them to have alcohol or vaping products. And then correct some of these that we know have been, racially the inequities that were in some of the prosecutions around this. Try and get that piece fixed. And I think at the end of the day, I still keep coming back. I lean towards, and I think it's pretty much a New Hampshire motto. the freedoms that people need to, especially adults, to make their own choices about these types of things need to be left to them, not the government. Whether that's if you're going to use adult use cannabis or your reproductive rights. Those are your decisions. We can put the parameters around it.
Last question for you. Should we be looking to see you here more as we get towards 2028? Obviously, people who've been in your position in the past have run for president.
Well, I'm here for this election for a Democratic governor in New Hampshire. I'll go anywhere to advocate for folks who want to have a functional government, one where government keeps itself out of your personal business, but invests in things like education, roads, and bridges. So this is my first opportunity to be in New Hampshire. It's beautiful, so I think if nothing else, I'll be back for that.
All right. Well, Governor Walz, thank you for being here on Close Up.
Thanks for having me.